Kathy. Good evening, everyone. Hugs and stitches to you all. Thank you so very much for attending our webinar. We're going to make this another great one. It's about beautiful embroidery lettering made easy with Floriani software. Look, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll tell you basically tonight what we're going to cover is basic adding text, manually adjusting your text. We're going to talk about circle text, changing the properties of your text, underlay and such. We'll talk a little bit about monograms, and we're going to talk about using your text designs and monogram designs. Let's go ahead and get started with working with your text. Number one, to initiate text on the screen, certainly you want a new screen. You then simply come up to your text tool, which is this letter A up in the top right-hand side of the screen. Go anywhere after you've clicked on that, go onto the screen and just left-click. You'll see the letter A comes up. At this point in time up here on the right side in the properties box, I'm just going to go ahead and type in my last name, Floriani. At this point in time, click Apply. After every function that you do within the text module, please click Apply. Apply will then generate it onto your screen. We're going to go ahead and just set this up on a one-to-one so it'll all fit the screen. Also, now to move it, you'll see that when I get on top of the text, I have this wonderful little hand that's telling you you're ready to grab. Left click, you can move the text anywhere then with on the screen. Okay, look, first of all, sizing. Down below the text box, you'll see it says height. Now, the software powers up and is set initially metrically. As I've said in all of my webinars, that I work metrically in embroidery, but I still think in inches, and I size in inches. We've reviewed this before. I'll cover it again. You can always go under Tools and General Options. You'll see you can then toggle units of measure from metric to inches. But the easiest way is if you come over here on the left on the margin line or up on the top on the margin line, right-click, and you can simply just toggle to inches. You'll now see over here on the right side again in the properties box that I'm now in inches. We're just going to go ahead and set that a little less than half an inch. We'll just set it at 45, hit Apply, and it's now sized. Let's go ahead and zoom into that a little bit more. Fill the screen with it, okay? So you size in that manner. Now, below that you have your spacing. This box right here is for lettering spacing in between the lettering. You'll see it set at 0 right now. I'm going to go ahead and just adjust it and change it to 5. We'll then go ahead and hit Apply, and you'll see the spacing widens. The gap in between the lettering now takes effect. Now, at this point in time, you'll see below it line spacing. We'll get back to this a little bit later, but line spacing is certainly for spacing in between the lines. I'll demonstrate that when we get to the stair steps, but let's go down below that. You then have the italic icon or the italic box. By clicking on it and clicking Apply, you'll see we get a nice little slant to the letters. It will italicize it. Now below it, you have stair step. Let's go ahead and turn off the italic, click on stairs, and click Apply. And you'll see that we now go stair stepping down on the side there. Now, at this point in time, look, I'll go ahead and adjust the line spacing. Line spacing certainly adjusts spacing in between lines of characters, but it can also be utilized in the stair step. So if I put in there a value of 50, you'll see that my stair step now increases. Okay? So those are just some of the real simple functions that you can do right there. Now, let's go into editing, and what I'm going to do is just take it back to a normal application. One of the things that I love about my Floriani software is that, to some extent, not to some extent, it is color-coded. First of all, notice the yellow diamonds in between the letters. When you see those yellow diamonds in between the letters, just one second. Let me go ahead and just get into here. The yellow diamonds signify spacing. When you want to space in between letters, just go on top of the yellow diamond. You'll see the little crosshairs, left click, and you can now space in between your letters. This is real helpful. Many times, like when you put a letter T next to a letter L, the way that lettering spaces is it spaces from end point to start point, meaning the letter L is going to end on the bottom right, the T its start point is up on the top left. It spaces from that point. But spacing with lettering many times can work itself into what I call negative spacing. In the case of a letter T, again, next to a letter L, you would have negative spacing, so you would utilize that and pull that back towards the top. Now, you also see here a series of either green dots in the center or green squares over on the far left and right corner. Let's talk about the center one first. This is for stretching. By going on top of the green dot, I can now pull, and you'll see that I'm now stretching the lettering up at the top in an arc like that. We'll go ahead and undo that function. You'll see that I then have the same on the bottom, and it will grab down at the bottom, and it will stretch then at the bottom. Now, one real nice thing here, though, and it's a nice little tip, and I'll go ahead and undo that again, is if you come to either the top or the left one in the center, and you hold down the Control key, get on top of it and stretch, you'll now see that it is stretching both top and bottom at the same time. A very, very, very wonderful little feature there. On the far left and far right, you see the green boxes. This is also stretching, but you'll see now, and I'm over here on the very far right, get on top of that one, and you'll see that I'm now stretching up towards the top. You'll see now as I come down to the one on the bottom that I'm now stretching down at the bottom. We'll go ahead and undo both those functions. But the same rule applies by holding down the Control key. When you hold down the Control key, I can simply come in here, and you'll see now I'm slanting or moving both top and bottom at the same time. And you have that same type of control over on the very far left. So I can come and grab that. I can stretch just that side. I can come down to the bottom one. I can then come in and I can stretch that side. Or once again, by holding down the Control key, I have control now to both sides. It's very, very self-explanatory. I love the fact that it's color-coded. Now, you'll also see the orange square on top or in the center of each letter. This is a wonderful feature because actually when you get on top of it and you've got those four little arrows, you can now grab any individual letter and move it anywhere within a design. I love that. Many times I'll bring up a design, generate my letter. You can then pull every individual letter and move it anywhere within the design itself. Now, another great feature here is once that you've pulled that initial text off of there, you now have control of just that one letter. So I can come here, let's say to the bottom right, and I can pull and I can actually stretch that in height and in size. That's very, very unique, and I think that's just a really, really neat feature with the Floriani software. One more thing that I'll show you is over here on the very far right, you have this little purple circle. By highlighting over that, this is literally just for turning this text around. You can turn it, slant it, and it just gives you the ability to circularize, just move around with that. It's a really, really unique little process, okay? Look, let's go ahead and talk now about circular text. So let me go ahead and get it back straight. We'll just use our undo. Over here on the very far left, you're also going to see a line. Look, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just type in my name, Walt, for the Floriani, and then hit enter to put Floriani on top. The alignment is for justification. Okay, if I click on left, let me go ahead and hit apply first. So now you'll see Walt Floriani, and if you look in a line, you'll see that we're centered. So the Walt is going to be centered on top of the Floriani. By left clicking, or by clicking on the down arrow now on that alignment tab, if I left click and click apply, it will now justify and put the Walt and the Floriani on the left. Pretty self-explanatory. We'll now go ahead and do it to the, we'll do it on the right side. Click apply. There we are. It's now justified over to the right. The Walt is located on the far right side. And then, of course, it powers up, and we're back to the center. Okay, let me just move this up on my screen a little bit. Now, I'm going to go ahead and remove the Walt. You know, one nice thing I think I'll go ahead and add here, and we didn't discuss it, one of the nice things about this little text box right here is, look, you can actually pull lettering from like a Word document and cut and paste just like a normal Windows program. You can cut and paste, drop that text in there, and it will also generate the text. All right, let's go ahead and talk about just some circular lettering. Down here where it says type, you'll see it says normal. Normal, of course, is just for normal, straight left to right, straight line. By going to circle, though, and clicking apply, you'll now see we've now put the lettering on an arc, okay? Now, a couple of real neat features here. Number one, if you come in here and drag this little black dot over on the very far right, you're going to stretch the lettering, okay? That's a real nice feature. In fact, when I take it back, and at the end when I'm done here with just a little bit on the arc lettering, I'll show you where I use that function an awful lot when I'm working with small text. But that's a nice feature. The stretch feature is a really, really nice feature on there. Also, over here, and I'm just going to, let's go ahead and just minimize that stretch. Pull it back up, okay? Over here now, on the center on the far left, you're going to see this other little dot. This is to control your arch. So let's say we've brought a design on, we've done our lettering, and it's a circular lettering, and the circle might be a little too tight. By coming on top of this and left-clicking, and then just moving with the mouse, you'll see I can now change the arch of the lettering. Okay, certainly now just pulling it in, get on top of it and pull it in, I can also tighten the arch. You also have the ability with your circle lettering to go reverse direction, to go a reverse arch. You do that simply by clicking on reverse direction. I'm over here in the properties box again. We're now going to come over and we'll go ahead and click on apply. And you'll now see that the text is in a reverse arch down here on the bottom. Now, you also, again, have all your spacing mechanisms in that with the colored coded yellow diamonds. Also, you can move, certainly, again, the orange, you can move each letter. One thing I really like, though, in the spacing here, and I'm just going to go ahead and move the L away from the F. See how the F moves also? The way that it spaces is that it's always going to justify the position of the F, in this case, the first letter in the line, to the last letter in the line. So you never have to worry about when you're working with an arch and changing that stretch or changing the spacing that they're going to end up in different positions. It's always going to justify to that same point, okay? And I think that's a really, really nice feature. Let's go ahead and turn off that again, and let's go back to just our normal, okay? Now, here's something I want to show you about the, let me go ahead, I'm sorry. Bring it back on straight, about the spacing. I'm going to change the lettering, and I'm actually going to just jump back to metric right now. But I'm going to make some really tiny lettering, okay? And we'll just make this 5 millimeters tall. That is very, very small lettering. And I'm going to go ahead and change the letter style. Let me just jump over, and we'll make this just Arial. And this is just a tiny little bit of embroidery knowledge thrown in here for you. Let's go ahead and zoom in. One of the things with small or minute lettering, okay, and certainly in creating beautiful lettering, you've all seen, I'm sure, when you run lettering, lettering sink down into the fabric. Look, the issue when lettering sinks away, or one of the primary reasons why we eat garments, is in the execution of a satin stitch made too narrow. There's a couple of ways that you can control it with Floriani software, but one of the simplest things, or the two ways that I'll share with you, is whenever you've generated very small text on the screen, okay, grab your ruler. First of all, let's go ahead and zoom in, okay. Grab your ruler and measure the width of the text, and you'll see that we're about 8, 9/10 of a millimeter in width. Folks, here's a very general rule about embroidery. The narrowest satin stitch that you should ever produce in an embroidery design is actually 1.4 millimeters in width. If you make a satin stitch narrower than 1.4 millimeters in width, that's a sure sign that the lettering is more than likely going to sink away into the fabric. Satin stitches do have a minimum width. Software will do anything basically you ask it to do. Will it work? Look. That's why the ruler is so prevalent within Floriani software. The narrowest satin stitch should be 1.4 millimeters in width. So we've generated small text. We come in and we measure its width. The lettering is 9/10 of a millimeter wide. It's telling us it's too narrow to work on a satin stitch. Well, one of the simplest ways to correct it, first of all, Let's say you want your lettering to be this tall, folks, but it's telling you before you run it right now it's not going to work. How can you correct it? With Floriani software, there's a very simple way. Select the lettering over in the sequence view. One of the simplest ways to select is just go ahead and click on the text. At this point in time, come up into your Pull tab up here on the very top right. Let's click on that. And let's go ahead and select Absolute. Now, one of the other unique things, or one of the things I love about the software, is that most pull compensation, let me explain first of all, pull compensation adds width to your satin stitches and to your fill stitches in an embroidery design. A lot of pull compensation in most embroidery software is based on percentages. I didn't really like percentages, and I really don't, because percentages certainly are based on the initial width of the structure. So we have a function called Absolute. Why? Because we absolutely know how wide we want to make it, folks. So I've selected the lettering. I've gone into Pull Comp, and I said, you know what? I want you to absolutely add, and let's call it 3/10 of a millimeter width to both sides of the satin stitch. We're down here, we're selecting both. Now, another unique thing about our pull compensation is you can control one side, the other side, or in this case, both sides. And then at this point, simply hit Apply. You'll see the lettering gets wider. At this point, I'll always grab my ruler, come in and measure the lettering again. You'll see we're 1.5 millimeters wide. Awesome. That's telling you it's going to work. Now, though, let me explain something else about embroidery in general. Small letters that close, small A's, R's, E's, P's, notoriously the openings will many times close. Well, look, that's because there is a minimum opening size also in the embroidery, okay? From that standpoint, when you have, like in this A, and I'm going to come in and zoom into it, always grab your ruler and measure the opening side right above the crossbar. And you'll see we're right about 5/6 of a millimeter. You know what? That's telling you that letter A is going to close when you run it. The smallest opening size you can achieve in embroidery is actually 0.8 to 1 millimeter. So that lettering, while we made it wide enough not to sink away into the fabric now, is telling us it's too small to open up to work when we're going to run it on a garment. Let me show you another neat trick. I'm going to go ahead and undo those functions, hit it back to the initial width, and then I'm going to view it so you can see the whole thing on the screen. In fact, I'm going to zoom out just one more time. There's actually two levels of editing within Floriani Text. When you first generate the lettering, and let's say if you click off of it, you'll see I have no selection. By clicking on the Select tool up here on the left toolbar, there's my Selection tool. Clicking on the lettering, you'll see it'll select the whole lettering. You're in the first level of editing. At this point in time, in the center, you can raise it up in size, bring it down. On the far right and the far left, you can also size in this manner. You also have the ability to rotate on this level of editing. Okay? But when you want to enter the next or the higher level of editing, simply click on the letter A again, the text tool. When you click on the text tool, you'll now see that once again it's color-coded. Now, again, I've taken it back to its original width. It was 9/10. So before I go in and add any width, this is one place where I very much use the stretch tool. And I can come in and I can grab the stretch tool over here on the bottom right, and without changing the height, I can now stretch the lettering. I'm doing two things. Number one, I'm stretching the width. Number two, I'm also opening up the opening size. So once again, let's just go ahead and zoom in here. I'll go ahead now and I'll grab my ruler once again, and I'm going to come in and measure, and you'll see we're right at 1.5. So just by using that stretch tool without changing height, we've now induced a wide enough satin stitch guarantee it's going to work. We then come across the letter A. Remember, we were down to 5/6 of a millimeter. We're at 1.4. The smallest opening size in embroidery you can achieve, again, is 0.8 to 1 millimeter. So with very, very tiny lettering, it's an awesome way to just stretch it out. You widen the satin stitches, and you open up the openings. Some very, very simple tips. Look, we're going to go ahead and talk about changing some of the properties, but believe it or not, I'm already 20-some minutes into it. You know what? Now, I'm going to go ahead and do it, then we're going to open up the questions. Changing the properties within the lettering. First of all, I'm going to make the lettering very, very large. I'm going to jump back to inches again, and I'm going to make this lettering 1 inch tall. And I'm going to go ahead and just choose on 1, hit apply. And now I have 1 inch tall lettering. I'm also going to go ahead back to that Bookman, and we're right here with this. So I'll go ahead and change it. Let's go ahead and hit the screen with it. Now, a satin stitch's ability to grow is based on the fact that there is a range of proper width of satin stitching. The proper width of satin stitching ranges from about 1.4 millimeters up to about 7 or 8 millimeters in width. Once you're over about 8 millimeters in width on a satin stitch, it's actually telling you at that point, you know what, I should have been a fill stitch. So we'll go ahead at this point. I'm going to just zoom in here. I'll always grab my ruler, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to measure it at the widest point. And you'll see that we're at, excuse me, I'm going to jump back to metric. I love the fact that the software so easily toggles back and forth to metric. Again, when you're working metrically, you're dealing with millimeters and tenths of millimeters. Many times with working in inches, there's just too many numbers. It's just a little more difficult. That's why I always work metrically. So again, I come into my lettering. I'm measuring it at its widest part. I'm right about 8 millimeters in width. Let me come in here and check it. It's borderline, but I would probably go ahead and say that's a little too wide to be a satin stitch, certainly on a piece of knit. Well, look, one of the neat things about the satin stitching or in the lettering program within my Floriani software is when you have a satin stitch that's too wide to be a satin stitch, simply select it. At this point in time, come up to your Properties box, and under the Fill tab, click on the Fill tab. You'll see that my fill type is a standard. Down below it is a standard satin stitch. At this point in time, I'm going to say it, you know what, I want you to be a tatami stitch. Tatami stitching is the Japanese vernacular basically for fill stitching. At this point in time, you can then come in and click on Apply. And you've now changed it into a fill stitch. Over here on the far left, we have a little icon called stitch ends. Those are actually needle penetration points. And you'll see when I generate them, I now have fill stitching in the lettering. If I undo it, you'll see there's my satin stitch. Go ahead and redo it, and you'll see that I now have fill stitching. Now, when you change something over to a fill, another thing that needs to then take place is you need to change your underlay. So if you come into your underlay, you can come in and you can put in a contour underlay if you want. The contour underlay is now going to put what we call an edge walk underlay. And under most lettering, under lots of fills, I always like to use my full lattice and change apply. Within the Floriani software, you have total control of all the underlay within the function. Let's go ahead and just do it parallel. I'm going up and down. These are going to send my underlay at the opposite direction of the top stitch. Excuse me, perpendicular was actually what I wanted to choose. I apologize. And you'll see that I now have full underlay. It's going to generate in just a second. Lattice. You have full control of your underlay within each function within the software. So you want to go in, you want to change underlay. Again, you have the ability when you go up in size to change it from a satin stitch to a fill stitch just at the click of a button. Absolute control of the software. Okay, Kathy, let's go ahead and open it up to a few questions. Then we're going to come in and we're going to talk more about underlay. I want to cover the underlay to some extent in much greater detail. Let's go ahead and open it up to some questions.
Okay, Walt, would you go back over? The question is how do you get your control points back into your software once you've deselected the lettering?
Once you've deselected the lettering, so I've come in. Let's go ahead and just view this on the screen so you can see the whole thing. And we'll fit the window. So now I'm deselected. In order to select all of the lettering, just come up to your select tool. There's several different ways. Click on
Well,
the
they want to know
select.
how to get their control points back. Your kerning icons, your resizing, your all your colored icons.
All you have to do at that point is just click on the letter A and just click on anywhere on the lettering itself, and you now have all of your control icons for spacing, for sizing, everything. You know, I should say at this point too, you also have an envelope feature within the software. I didn't mention this before. Whenever you're selected, if you come along just the edge and right click, you'll now see that you have envelope. You actually have all of these pre-shaped choices in here. So if I want like a bridge concave top, just come and click on bridge concave top, and you have it right there. Now again, to deselect it, once you're deselected, 2 levels of editing. By clicking on the select tool and clicking on the lettering, you're now at your first level of editing, which is just sizing, height, width. You can also rotate. But all again, you have to do is click on the A icon. You don't even have to click on the lettering. Just clicking on it, and there it is. And again, another way to select within the software, and I always like to make this real clear, is once the software or the lettering is deselected, one of the simplest ways to select is over in the sequence view. Just click on it in the sequence view, and you'll see that you've selected it. And once again, just click on your letter A, and you get to the higher level of editing right there.
Great. And, well, what are your favorite alphabets for small lettering?
You know, what alphabet one chooses to use, for me, has never been the issue, okay? The issue is one of width. So no matter what lettering I choose, now, I'll tell you quite honestly, I always look for lettering that tends to be a little bolder, but you've got 135 choices here in the lettering. You've got an enormous choice of lettering. Well, I can come in, and let's go ahead, and I'm just going to make a new screen, and let's talk about, like, and I'll show you one of my favorite ones, okay? Let's click on lettering, and let's just type my name in there. Let's type welcome. I don't always have to put my name in there. And let's make this 4 millimeters tall, okay? Let me go ahead and get rid of this. Now, no matter what letter style, again, I choose, okay, I'm always going to come in, once again, grab that ruler. I'm going to look for the narrowest satin stitch, and I'm going to measure its width, okay, 0.8 of a millimeter. Again, too narrow. Now, when you ask what my smallest ones are, the ones that I really like, let me see if it's been added here, but a lot of times when I'm working with small lettering, I will use, for block lettering, Arial 4 millimeters, and click on it. Okay, excuse me, I needed to select it first. And then just come in and use your Arial 4 millimeter. The 4 millimeter lettering that's in here was designed specifically for small lettering, and you'll see I am right at about 1.3, 1.4 millimeters in width. So if you're going to ask me, number one, what's my favorite letter style for small block lettering, you're looking at it. It's Arial 4 millimeters. It was developed for 4 millimeter lettering. If you come in and look, you'll also see, and I'll just go ahead and add a letter A in here, okay, and apply it, that the opening sizes, everything has been developed. Look, and you'll see that opening right now is 1.3. That's without adding any compensation. That's without adding anything to it. It's already the proper width. It's already the proper opening size. Now, there's a couple other, I'm going to leave this, we'll leave this design because we'll come back and I'll refer to this a couple of times because if time allows, where I'm going to go ahead and show you guys just a couple of tricks when I'm doing small lettering, connecting the lettering and things like that. But I guess, again, I will use any lettering as long as I can get it onto that width, and I've shown you a couple of ways that you can increase width, stretching or just adding width. But again, always remember, if you're adding width to a structure using the pull compensation, you've got to ensure your A's, your R's, your small e's, your P's, that that opening is maintained at 0.8 to 1 millimeter. But that Arial 4 millimeter, it works great. Now, I'd like to also make one other thing clear. I talk about the 1.4 millimeter being the narrowest satin stitch width. That is kind of my golden rule. But look, stabilizer, does indeed have a big part to play with it. Also machine speed. So if you bring up a design and you're sitting with lettering it at 1.2, 1.3, or under 1.4, but let's say between that range of 1.1 up to 1.4, and you've increased the width using the pull compensation, it closes the hole. Look, topping has a great amount of ability to minimize some of the pull. Absolutely, just slow your machine speed down and use one of our toppings, either our water-soluble or the heat and gone topping. That adds loft, but it also to some extent minimizes the pull a little bit. It actually lets you get away with a satin stitch a little narrower than 1.4. Slowing the machine speed down is also very key with small lettering in many cases, because the slower you run a machine, the less pull is exerted on the embroidery thread. So here's a little bit of embroidery knowledge added on to you.
And one more question, Walt. Do you lettering on cardstock? You know, that's becoming very, very popular.
Yes.
How would we do lettering on cardstock?
Oh, that's a great question, Kath. And look, I'm going to try to simplify it. And I'm going to just bring up a new screen. I'm going to click on a letter A here, and I'm going to go ahead and make just, and we'll use just the letter I. And I is a great example. And let's go ahead and apply that. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and change to inches. And let's make this fairly sized. We're going to talk about that's actually good. It doesn't really matter what the size. Look, let me explain something. When you're digitizing or when you're working, first of all, I'm on a standard. I got a 0.5 density. I just want to make sure my settings are correct. Let me zoom in here, okay? Whenever you generate text, or I should say just about computers in general, computers are perfect. In my opinion, they know two things, on and off, but they are perfect structures. You can see with the black box that's coming around here, one of the challenges when you're working on cardstock, and this is also very true with working on leather or naugahyde, any materials that don't really have a grain to it. The fact is that every stitch along this line on the left side and on the right side, and I'll go ahead and mark the stitches, every stitch falls exactly above and below the stitch above it and below it. In actuality, what that causes is that's a cut line, okay? Perfect stitches can cut materials, okay? So the simplest way to work on cardstock and the simplest way to work on materials, again, leather and naugahyde, select it. Underneath your column tab up here in the properties box in your column tab, you'll see it says jagged type. What I would select is I want on both sides and put in a value of 1 to 2/10 of a millimeter. I'm just going to do 2 so you can see it more, and hit apply. Okay? What you'll see, I didn't select it properly. I'm so sorry. Come into there, both sides. I want a 2. Hit apply. And widen do it. Hold on just 1 second, Kath. I've got something going on right here, and I just need to correct it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of the grid, and I'm just going to come in and digitize the letter I, okay? One of the things about perfect stitching, okay, and let's come in and zoom in now. And again, what we have is along this line, we have perfect stitches above in each one. Select it, come under your column tab, select on both sides an offset of about 2/10 of a millimeter, and hit apply. What you see now along this entire line is different needle penetrations. Now, right now, it looks like a huge amount, but look at the amount that I'm zoomed in. When I take this down to a 1-to-1 selection, you can't tell that's not imperfect. The fact is that imperfect stitches run perfectly. As I zoom in again, with an offset, and in reality, all you need to do is go just 1/10 of a millimeter is normally sufficient. That's 1/10 of a millimeter. I mean, that's almost, you can barely see 1/10 of a millimeter. It's such a small amount. But when you're working on things like cardstock where it will cut it, okay, that's the way not to cut it. Every needle penetration is entering a different piece of that cardstock, hence you'll never cut it. The same thing very much holds true with, again, leather, naugahyde. Now, the other thing with materials like that is they don't like excessive stitching. Normally, I will use just center line underlay, okay? Or, in many cases, I'll even turn it off and let the underlay just basically be travel underlay. Things like leather, things like naugahyde, even cardstock, they don't like a lot of excessive stitching. Now, the difference is on cardstock, I do have the ability, I want to get a little bit of loft. Pretty much I'm going to use center line. Always use a topping. The fact is that on materials that don't bear excessive stitching, example, leather. Leather does not like a constant pounding of the presser foot. It can misshape the leather, certainly based on the width of the leather, but it can misshape it. So the least amount of stitching that we do is probably, it is an overall benefit for the material. Use a topping. Floriani topping takes the place of underlay in many cases. It adds enormous loft to your stitching. So on cardstock, I'm going to use a topping. I'm going to use a jagged edge satin on both sides with an offset of 1. It's going to loft beautifully. You'll never cut a piece of cardstock. Normally the first time you stitch on cardstock or materials like leather, even though there's no comparison between those two materials, their reaction to the stitch is very much, it's not a woven fabric. It is basically, in the case of leather, a hide. The other one is paper. Stitches will cut it. They react very much the same to stitching.
Okay, Walter, we've got one more question and then we need to move on. When you move the letters off the baseline, when we take our orange square and we move our letters around, when we have one word,
yes,
do we lose the trim between the letters when we pull them off that baseline?
The fact is, and I'm going to get into the command settings in just a little bit, but when you bring up lettering within Floriani software, let me show you. And again, I'll just come in and type Floriani. We'll give it a size, and we'll just go back to inches again. I'll make it again about 45. Okay, bring it up on the screen. Let me change the needle penetrations.
You know what, Walt, we're kind of losing your sound. You're kind of getting away from your microphone.
I'm so very, very sorry. Can you all hear me a little better? Can you hear me better?
Now you're good. You're good.
Let me go ahead and move this onto the screen. The initial settings in Floriani software, and when I go ahead and I'll move that, okay, you'll still see that in between I have a movement stitch. If you come over to commands, okay, you'll see that the base command in between characters, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we'll go ahead and talk about the command sequence right now. You'll see that the base command, the power-up command, is for a trim in between the letters, in between the characters, okay? So it's always going to trim in between the characters, but I can also tell it that I don't want it to trim, so I'll select none. Hit apply, and now what I have is a jump stitch. It will make a movement down into here, but the machine will not trim. Trimming is a command sequence that's set within the software. So I have the ability, power up is a trim in between. I can throw it in between characters, which is what the power up is, and that's what you'll see right there. You also have the choice just to trim in between words or in between lines within any given structure. So again, a wonderful level of control. Now, want to make sure that those trims are there. Over here on the very far left, you have a commands tab. If you click on the commands tab and you've activated a trim, and I'll go ahead and zoom in now, you'll see that you actually get a little pair of scissors. Let me zoom out. You actually see them a little better when I zoom out. It shows a pair of scissors. That's indicating a trim. Once again, we've tried to, I'm not going to say color-coded, but give you a symbol here that's telling you, oh my gosh, I've got a trim in there in between letter. So anytime, again, when you first generate under the Commands tab, you have the ability to trim in between characters, in between words, in between lines, or by choosing none, it's not going to trim in between, and you're going to end up with that dreaded little stitch in between. Now, you know what? based on that, Kathy, I'd like to just throw in a little bit of just base embroidery knowledge here. This little trim in between letters, or not when it trims, when it moves in between letters, that thread always sticks out to me like a sore thumb, okay? And one of the things that I like to do, and let me make very clear, that this is for characters that are spaced about 8/10 to 1 millimeter apart. So I come in, well, this thing, excuse me, let me just jump back to metric. The spacing in between this, well, I'm at 5 millimeters, so I'm going to come in number 1, and I'm going to pull that very close to the other letter. When you have characters, small lettering, and I made this was almost half-inch lettering, but when I have lettering that's spaced very close together, I don't always want to, especially with small lettering, I don't want to trim in between those letters, okay? Every time you trim, you stand the chance when the needle reinserts of having what's called thread pull-out. It takes about 4 to 7 revolutions of the embroidery hook in order to reattach or retie to the top thread, okay? So many times I'll turn off the trim command and let it just make its movement stitch over. But once again, to me, this is a dreaded stitch because it sticks out like a sore thumb. So here's a little trick, folks, as old as the embroidery process itself. When I have small lettering spaced about 8/10 to 1 millimeter apart, come to your 4th icon down on the left side, right here. It's your stitch icon. You're now going into Stitch Edit. By going into Stitch Edit, I will always look for the first stitch that I went to in the next letter, and it's right. Let me move some of these out of the way. Sometimes a little hard to find. It's right there, okay? That's the first new needle penetration in the letter I. Once you've clicked on it, move it a little bit to make sure you've got the right one, you'll see a little black box on it. Right-click and simply click Insert Before. I'm going to drop now a stitch right here, and I'm going to drop 2 to 3 tiny little stitches in between the lettering, ending up right on the edge of this letter, and then right-click to end the sequence. You'll see now that I've dropped little tiny stitches in between the letters. These stitches, the length is about 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. When you drop running stitches 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter into almost every fabric, it drives down into the fabric. It will disappear. You'll never have to trim that thread out again. And you're following the first rule of embroidery that I was ever taught by my father, and that is that embroidery is best laid in a continuous filament of thread. The 10 seconds that it takes you to do that in between each letter, you're all going to love me. I swear you'll all love me for that tip because you never have to trim it again. Those stitches disappear in there. It's a fabulous little trick. That's as old as the embroidery process itself. Another question, Kath, are you ready for me to
I think it's time you need to move on.
Okay. Look, we're going to go ahead and talk about the underlay properties that are within here. So let me go ahead and generate some new stitching again, and I'm going to go ahead and type just again my name, Floriani. Okay. Click Apply. Let's bring it onto the screen again, move it over. Okay. You have full underlay control. Now, once again, for me, normally with lettering, I'm going to use several types of underlay. Let me get rid of these needle penetrations here. To change your underlay, simply select the sequence view, okay? Click on your underlay tab at the top. For small lettering, I use basically 3 styles of underlay most times that I'm working with underlay. For small lettering, though, I will normally use a center line. So I select on it, click on click on center line. I'll turn off the parallel, click Apply, and you have center line underlay. Now, one of my favorite underlays for small lettering, the smaller or the narrower the satin stitch, normally the lighter the density. So I will normally come into my text, okay, or into my fill, and you'll see that our density is preset at 0.5. That's 10 to 20% less than most other software, okay? But many times with real small lettering, I will go to a 0.6 underlay. That's going to reduce the overall density in that design about, and why is it not? Just one second. Selected it, it changed it, hit apply. For some reason, Kathy, I apologize, I just glitched on here. I'm going to close this down for just a second. I'm not going to close out of the whole thing. And I'm going to generate some new text. Let me just come in and type in Floriani once again. Now I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go to inches, and I'm going to set this up at about 0.25. And I'm going to pick, I know exactly what the problem was. The software didn't glitch. You know what it was, Kath? I was set on Arial 4 millimeters, and that was superseding all of my effects that I was trying to make change. Because in the Arial 4 millimeters, it's set specifically to a specific underlay style and such. So I had just picked the wrong alphabet style. I totally apologize, everyone. You select it, then click on underlay. I'm going to turn off the parallel, and I'm going to add centerline and click apply. And I've got a centerline underlay. Once again, I'm set at a 0.5 density. I will come in here, and I'm going to change this to a 0.6 density, hit apply. You'll see the density lightened by about 10%. One of the simplest tricks with small lettering is heavy underlay, light top stitch, okay? So at this point in time, go back into your underlay tab and then articulate by using the zigzag and click apply. I call this a loft and lock underlay. It is my absolute favorite underlay under small lettering. I'm working now with a series. Also, another thing, in my underlay, I'm setting stitch lengths of 3 millimeters. The longer the underlay, the greater the loft to the top stitch. So by setting a 3 millimeter length underlay, I'm throwing an elongated underlay, then followed by a double zigzag. It forces two things. Number one, it forces the underlay to be a continuous filament of thread throughout the entire process. The zigzag then locks that underlay in place. Many times when you do small lettering, folks, and you've used more than a single underlay, you'll many times see like the underlay pop out from outside of the lettering, okay? Most people eliminate underlay when they see that happen. Don't. Use an elongated underlay. The minute this zigzag goes over the top of it, it locks the centerline underlay in place. I call it loft and lock. In fact, when you get done with just the underlay in this small letter, it's almost going to look like a letter at all already. We then back off on top stitch about 10%. It lofts beautifully. You will never stagnate or stagger the material. It will feel like butter, and you'll have some of the cleanest and clearest and most beautiful lettering or most beautiful underlay that you'll ever see, or lettering that you'll ever see. It is really, really quite amazing. Okay, we're going to move on and talk about changing some of the pull compensation also, because realize with pull compensation, again, you have absolute control on the software. So just simply come into pull, and let me explain the difference. Pull and push, okay? You have both pull control and push control. For those who don't understand, I'm going to go ahead and generate just the letter I, and I want to explain, number one, I tend to assume that people would know what pull and push are, but I'm going to go ahead and explain it to you anyway. There are two constants in the embroidery process. The first constant is called pull. Letter I stitches left to right. The letter I always runs narrower than the size that it was created. The second constant is called push. The letter I will actually grow in height also, okay? It's based on density. Density being how close we put our stitches together. It's also based on thread weight. Put a little too much density in the design, the letter I will grow in height. It gets narrower and it grows in height. Anytime I digitize or work with small lettering, or lettering in general, the natural pull of a satin stitch is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. So I will select it. I will come under the pull control. I will tell it to absolutely add 2/10 of a millimeter width to both sides of that satin stitch, okay? Once I've done that, okay, Absolute, add 2. It'll add 2/10 of a millimeter in width. I then do the same thing to the push, okay? The absolute value of push in satin stitching is also 2 to 3/10. And so what it does, and if you saw there, it actually cut it off in height. It got shorter, okay? So whenever I generate keyboard lettering, I normally will go into my pull. I will tell it absolutely to go 2/10 of a millimeter wider on both the left and the right. I will tell it to shrink in height 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. That allows for the natural pull, the natural push that happens when you run an embroidery design. Pull and push are absolutely the constants in embroidery. They take place every time you run an embroidery design. Now, you also have in our pull control the ability to go and add your pull, and we'll exaggerate this. We'll make it about 5 on the first side. The first side is the left side. You can also do, you know what, it's easier if I bring up a grid, and let's set this perfectly right on the grid. Let's go ahead and undo that pull. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and move this so it's sitting right on the grid line here on the left. So if I come into my pull control now, okay, come into my pull, let's make it exaggerated and add 6. And I'm going to tell it on the first side, hit apply, and you'll see on the left side it now got wider 6/10 of a millimeter. This is a wonderful level of control. We really worked hard and long on this. Second is then the right side. It's going to add it to the right side. Again, most pull control, most push control is controlled on both sides. Very little software, if any, offers you the control of first or second, or in this case left, then right side, or top and bottom. It was an amazing, amazing advancement within the software. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some of the command sequence that you have also, all right? So we have text selected, and I'm going to go ahead and I will just generate one more time just some text, and I'll get rid of the grid. And I'll just use my name Walt up here. Again, grab the text tool, just type in my name Walt. Okay, we'll go ahead and generate it. Let's go ahead and pull it onto the screen. And let's go over here to the Commands tab. Scroll over to the Commands tab, okay? First of all, you have a Start command. The Start command is the movement stitch from the center of the design, or in this case from the center of the design. This is showing the beginning and the end of the design. This design is basically starting and ending center, center. If you want to change the start position, let's talk about that, because that's actually a command in my opinion also. Up here at the top, you'll see this little stoplight. If I click on that down arrow, you'll see that the first choice is center. Probably 98% of designs start and end center, center in an embroidery design. But you can also choose first stitch. By selecting first stitch and apply, the design will start and end at the location of the first stitch. You then have the choice of last stitch. You'll see that it moves. You also have the selection of starting on the first stitch, ending on the last stitch. You also have the option of choosing one location. Now you can choose any location. That design now is going to start and end there. Or you can choose 2 locations. Put in your first choice where you want it to be, put in your second choice where you want it to end. So you have a wonderful level of where the design starts and ends. Now, where do you use them differently? Look, normally when you're working with like first stitch, last stitch, is when you're talking about a continuous embroidery design. So there are usages for it, absolutely. Now, back to the Commands tab. Click on it. Let's jump over to the Commands tab. Your first choice is your Start command. That is the movement from the starting point to the first needle penetration. You can either do it with a jump stitch, with a trim stitch. You can also make the move and make it stop. Frame out we use when we're working with applique designs. You can use it with frame out. You also have an end command of being a trim, jump, a stop, or a frame out. You then have, though, a tie-in. Now, let me explain something about tie-ins. Tie-ins are stitches that take place. In this case, we have at the beginning and at the end. The most important stitch in embroidery is the lock stitch. These are your lock stitches. Now, the basic, if I go ahead and choose basic, and I'm going to go ahead and we'll generate commands, okay? But a basic stitch and I'm going to come down here to the end of the letter L, and I will generate this needle penetration points, and you'll see that we have a series of drop stitches. The basic tie-in in this case, or excuse me, tie-in and tie-off. Let me come in here to my commands, excuse me. Okay. I've got a basic for both. Basic is a series of 3 to 4 stitches. It drops the last stitch, then it drops 2 to 3 stitches along the same line. That's a basic lock stitch. By choosing triangle, it makes a triangle shape. This is more of a traditional type of a tie-off. Now, looks like it shows. Look, by grabbing a ruler and coming in here, that's a very, I mean, that's not even, let's go back to metric and you'll see how minimal that movement is. You're talking about 1/10 of a millimeter. That's not going to show. So while it appears that it's popped out there, it's not going to show at all. So you have the choice of a basic or a triangle, both tie-in and tie-off. What's my favorite? Normally, my tie-in is a triangle. I like the tie-in. It's more of a traditional. I actually like the basic when I tie off. I think you get a little cleaner of a tie-off in the sequence when you're using the basic, okay? You also have in commands, and once again, if you've selected a trim in between characters, you're always going to see this little pair of scissors. You also have in commands the ability, and let's view the entire design again to fit the window, okay? I can, in between letters, I can add a color change. So if I want a color change with my characters, once it's selected, click on it, and you now have, excuse me, a different color for each letter. You can also choose under the Commands tabs with your color change. You can choose to have color changes in between words or in between lines of stitching. So you have the choices of characters, words, and lines. You also then have the ability to trim in between characters, in between words, and in between lines. So once again, start commands, end commands. You have your normal. I normally set it to normal. Normal is actually just the normal movement. It actually is a jump stitch. It's going to make a jump stitch movement. They're basically the same. Leave them set at normal. It will lift the needle, move into position. Use a tie-in. Again, my preference is a triangle. The choice is actually up to you. You can also use the basic, and that is the difference between the others. Okay, let's move on and talk about creating monogram lettering, because you've got some really neat features with the monogram lettering in between Floriani. And the first one of the differences is next to the text tool up here on the top right, you have a monogram tool. Simply select your monogram tool and click anywhere within the box or within the screen, up it comes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put in my 3 initials, WFA, okay, and hit apply, and you now have a 3-letter monogram. Now, let me explain something. You can use any font within the lettering styles, okay? So within our 135 lettering styles, you can choose any font that you choose to use. Here I'm going to use Century 2. Come in, and I can use any letter style with the font, okay? But you also have, within monogramming, the ability to use, and as we scroll down in the choices of our lettering, you'll see we have a whole series of now fancy monogram style text, okay? So as you come down, you'll see there's 30-some different fancy monogram style text. Let's go ahead and just pick 25 and click apply. It'll take just a second, and you'll see that I now have all 3 letters will be done within those same exact characters, and there you go. Now, one of the other neat things is you not only have all the fancy monogram style of letters, you also then have down here on the bottom, you have the top 13 monogram styles within the industry, okay? So I'm going to come in here and we can choose, let's say just that one. Click on apply, and now you have the lettering there. You can choose any one of them that you want, and again, you've got all 13 styles that are in here. Choose any one that you want. I use that one an awful lot. Now, let me explain something. When you choose to use the monogram style of lettering, okay, when you choose to use that, you'll see down below it says Decor. In the fonts, when you see the green M over here on the left, anytime you see that M, that's telling you that with those styles, you have all of these different decor borders. By selecting any one of the borders, it will size, and then you click Apply. It will size perfectly, and it will apply that decor border right to it, okay? So you not only have all of those monogram styles, you also have the ability to add decor. Each monogram, they do not all carry the same decor. These are specifically created for all of the different monogram styles that are located within the software. So they're not all the same. One neat thing to do is just look through them all, and you can go ahead and play with the decor. Now, another thing that you can do with the monograms, and again, I'll just come up here and pick, we'll come up to the Beckham again, I think that was. I use that a lot. I just think that runs real well, the Bookman, excuse me. Okay? Now, we do not have any kind of a decor on there, so you'll see I get no decor at this point in time. But up here, 2 icons over, you have a series of monogram designs. So you can now click on your monogram designs, and you have all of these different styles of monogram borders, okay? Now, these will not size perfectly. So if I come in, I can grab any one of them. Up it comes on the screen, okay? To size it, come to any one of the corners. You'll see those 2 arrows. Just left click and drag it, get it to the size that you want. At this point in time, you've got the hand, just put it in position. I'll probably have to size that up just a little bit more. I'm just going to left click, hold, drag by pulling out. Then you put it in any position that you want where the lettering fits, and you also have, again, then all of these nice borders that you have. Again, that icon is located. It's called Monogram Designs, and we give you this entire selection of monogram designs. Now, that's a lot about the text, but I want to also show you what we call our text designs and a usage that I use for them. Look, right next to the monogram icon are your text design icons. Now, you know what? I want to make very clear to people, too. If you go into your text design icon, and as you scroll down, you'll see there is an enormous amount of designs within here, enormous. If you open up your software and you find that you only have 30 or 40 of those, you need to put your master disk back in and install your support files. Many of these designs are located within the support files on your master disk. So if you do not see it come up, go ahead and throw that in, install your support files, and you will have all of your text designs. Let me show you how you use the text designs. I'm going to go ahead and click on this letter S. Letter S comes up on the screen. Once again, you can size in this manner if you want, just by going to one of the edges, pulling and pushing. Let's move it over here on the left. So I'm going to start this lettering with the letter S. Now, my daughter's name is Scarlett, so I'm now going to grab my text tool, come in here, and I'm going to left click, and then I'm just going to type the balance of her name, C-A-R-L-E-T-T. Click OK and apply it. Now, once I apply it, I always bring it into the color of the first letter. Whenever you bring up a text design, that sequencing is always going to end up at the end. So I'll right-click, and I'll just change it over to the same color, and now I'm going to put it into position. Let's go ahead and view the entire design, and you can really create some really, really neat designs using the text designs. Now, another way that I use it is, again, I'll go into the text designs. I always tell Scarlett she's my little monkey, and I love this little monkey design right here. I'll go ahead and I'll grab that monkey. I'll go ahead and I'll size it. I'll then grab the monkey, and I'm going to go ahead and hang that monkey right from that letter T. Right-click, and that's another wonderful usage of the text designs. You're limitless. You have such total control with or absolute control with these letters. You can move individual letters. I think the ability to edit those individual letters, utilizing the text designs, and my gosh, just look at what you get in here with these text designs. You can create, just with the text feature within this software, an amazing amount, just an amazing amount of designs. You have full editing capabilities with it, sizing, rotating, pretty much anything that you want. I love the lettering. And again, the biggest thing that I can leave you with here is lettering with and small lettering. I've always asked the question when I teach classes. I bring little lettering up onto the screen and I ask people if anyone can look at it and if it's going to work. Only once did a young lady put up her hand and say it wasn't going to work. And I said to her, I said, you know what, I've asked 1,000 classes, how do you know that little lettering is going to work? Not going to work. You're the first person who ever said they can look at it, and it's not going to work. And she yelled back out at me, they never do. Once again, the fact is the small lettering's always been a challenge. If I leave you with one rule tonight, it is minimum satin stitch width. Whenever you generate small lettering, big lettering always seems to work well, folks, but whenever you generate small lettering, the only thing I'm going to insist and ask you to do, and here again I'll make this very, very small lettering, 5 millimeters, just before you ever run lettering this small, zoom in, grab your ruler, measure it in width, under 1.4 millimeters. Now right here I'm at 1.2. Look, select it. Come into your pull control. Tell it absolutely add 1/10 of a millimeter more width on both sides. Pow! That baby's going to work now. You wouldn't think 1 or 2/10 of a millimeter would mean that much. It's everything. It's everything when it comes to small lettering. Kath, I'm starting to run out of time, and I'll keep going on if y'all let me. I am loving this. Let's go ahead and open it up to some more questions, and then we'll finish up.
Okay, well, we do have two questions. The first question is when you went in and you changed all the characters' colors.
Yes.
Why would you want to do that?
Why would you want to do that? You know what? I'll show you. I'll show you a very simple example, or where I want to use it. Now, many times you might just want to have different colors and characters, but let me explain something. And I'm going to go ahead and generate just you know what, Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and type your name. K-T-H, excuse me. Snap. Kath here. My finger's not working right, okay? Let's say that we are running this design. I'm sorry, I forgot the I in there. So you're Kath right now. But let's say we're running on a cap machine, okay? And this is one place where, as a commercial embroiderer, I use the combination of changing to text. But a lot of home embroiderers now have the machines that will run cap frames. Well, one of the things when you're working on cap frames is that they want you to stitch from center out of an embroidery design. Now, if I hit View and slow redraw, and I'll just speed this up, you'll see that this is going to run, certainly it's going to stitch the K, the A, the T, the H, and the I, okay? That's the way text always works. But now, if I was working on one of the new home machines that offer me cap technology, they want to stitch from center out. So they want the A to go before the K. So they want it to stitch like A, K, T, H. Well, look, one of the things with all software that has text, and I'm going to go ahead to the sequence view and I'm going to open it up, and you'll see it says just text. Well, that does not give me any ability to change the running sequence. In fact, it very much minimizes my editing ability. Well, one of the real highlights on Floriani software is the ability for the software to work with stitch files, okay? DST files, foreign files. So watch what I do. I'm going to come into commands, and I'm going to change it to color change in between characters. Okay, I now have a different color in between every character. At this point, I'm going to just do File and Save As. And I'm just going to save it as, I named you Cat, so we're going to call you Cat. And I'm going to change it over to a foreign file, like a DST file, and save it. I then very simply hit New, and I hit Open. And I'm going to come in and just pull up that same thing. And there you are right there, Kat. And it will come up as a 4-letter or a 4-color design. But if you look now in the sequence view, you'll now see it runs K-A-T-H. Well, you know what? Grab the letter A, move it into the position above the K, and release. Because now, when I run it, watch, View, Slow Redraw, and I'll speed it up. I'm now stitching perfectly, or excuse me, I'm now stitching perfectly, center out, A, K, T-H, okay? Now, at this point in time, I can also come in and I can hit then select, Control A, which will select it all, and I can then right-click on a color, and I take it all back to one color. So literally, I will use the color change feature in between letters when I want to gear the design to any specific machine type, in this case a cap machine. Hope
Great.
that helps.
That's great. The other question is, and we never can get away from this when we're doing lettering, what about TrueType fonts?
TrueType fonts actually work pretty darn well within the software. We're working on some new features that are going to make it better, but to import TrueType fonts, just hit File and import your TrueType text, okay? At this point in time, I can just select, I can write my name, it doesn't really matter, okay? And just bring it up, and there it is on the screen. Now, let me explain something. We're working on a feature because there's two ways now, because basically what I have now, and if I select on it, is I have artwork, okay? So you have two different choices at this point in time. One of the choices is you can convert to stitches. So if I click on that L, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to convert to. Now, let me explain something at this point, folks. The ability for a piece of artwork just to convert over, one of the things that they need, now I'm going to go ahead and tell this, and I'm going to convert this to a satin stitch, okay? And it'll make a nice satin stitch. So with most lettering, the convert to with TrueType fonts works extremely well. But on certain letters, okay, and it would probably do here in the A, it probably would glitch. Let me explain why. In this letter A, I actually need to have a line that draws from here to here and from here to here. If I did that, then I could convert all three elements, and it would convert perfectly. Now, you know what? I'll go ahead and attempt it. I'll go ahead and right-click on it, because you don't give up with this, because the other nice thing is you always have, when you're working with artwork, you have two abilities, okay? The problem is that when you have that, see how it tried to make the curve around here? It's trying to miter the corner. Now, that's not bad. I mean, that could almost be acceptable to run. But when I have a scenario like this, and please understand, we're working on a feature that would allow us to put the lines in. If I were able to have a line here, and then I would have a line right up here, I'd have it in 4 segments, and convert to would work perfectly. But with this, I also have the ability to come in, and I can always digitize it in a very traditional manner. So the letter A could also be digitized very much like this, okay? You could come into here, right like this. This part would go right up to here. So you have two different choices when you're importing TrueType text. You can either convert it to stitches, or you can use traditional digitizing, which is what you're witnessing right there. That letter A, that's how I want it to look. That'll run perfect. We are working on it. Once I have the ability to put that line right there, and one right up here, that ability to convert, it's going to revolutionize the TrueType technology within embroidery, within our software, certainly. In most letters, it will work pretty well. If it glitches on you, just bring up that letter and learn to digitize it in a little bit more of a manual manner, and it really simplifies it. And look, you can get real easy with it, because I used the classic satin. But I could also come in here and I could use the satin stitch that's just our input satin path, where I would come in and define the one side, right-click, get over to the other side, come down here, right-click, that's done, okay? At that point, though, I would actually move my endpoint. I'd select that, and I'd go into reshape, and I'd make sure that my endpoint, which is right there, that's perfect. I just wanted to see where it ended. Okay, grab my input sat and path again, and once again, just right there, get to the other side right there, come to this side right there, and boom, and you got it. So it's very simple to digitize with, certainly, and it's certainly easy to convert over. Convert is probably the method that I want to do. Another thing about when we convert to stitches, this actually is very narrow lettering, but it's making a very nice soft turn through here. It's because we use a type of technology that's called fractional spacing, that when we allow the computer to make its own turns, it's trying to maintain the same spacing here as it is here, so it makes really nice soft turns. That was a great question. I really love TrueType text, and it's awesome that you asked it. DJ and I were just working on that earlier today. Any other questions, Kath?
No, Walt, because we are out of time.
Out of time, Kathy. I don't like running out of time.
I know, and it's out of time.
3 or 4 hours. You know that.
I know it.
Okay, well, look, I am going to go ahead and I will turn control over to you folks. Look, most of the data on the website, there is a wonderful, wonderful workbook, and it's located right on the very top left. If you go into My Floriani Today, you'll see download the Floriani workbook and lesson files. This was written by DJ. It is amazing, okay? Everything that I basically just have covered starts on about page 135. The basic editing, the manual adjusting text boxes starts on page 135. Circle text, page 138. The changing text, 142, runs up through about page 150. That workbook is one of the greatest things that have ever been developed for the software. I think everyone needs to download it. We have to move quick with these webinars, folks. I hope you got it. I got enough out of it. I love doing these. I can't wait to see you and talk to you all again. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, staff. I can't tell all you folks. There are so many online tonight. We are loving it. There is a magnificent group of people behind the scenes helping us. Thank you, all my educators. Thank you, all of you behind the scenes. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, DJ. And thank you, folks, all of you, for attending our webinar. Hugs and stitches to you all. I look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you so much, Walt. We will continue to answer your questions for about the next 15 minutes. As you've typed them in, we will get answers back over to you. We want to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate you tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Up on the screen now, you will see the download to get those Floriani workbook and lesson files. It's also on the My Floriani Today screen of your software. And thanks so much for coming.